I want to welcome all of you to the 6th episode of Stefan Frank's Photobook Show. And today's subject is Moonlighting, number 2, when writers photograph. And I am Anja of StrudelmediaLive. Thank you for joining. For those of you who don't know Stefan yet, Stefan is based in Heidelberg, Germany. I got to meet him in person finally this summer. I used to know him only digitally. If you have questions for Stefan during his talk, you can put them into the chat, or Stefan, I think it's okay with you if people unmute and just ask, right? So
just ask. I'm fine with it.
It's always nice that there's a little more of a dialogue. Just unmute yourself and ask. The talk will last about an hour. And yeah, Stefan, I will let you get started. Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here tonight, because it's night in Germany already, as you probably see here. Let me start by wishing you all a good, happy new year. Yeah, and without further ado, let me get you a little introduction into what we will be talking about today. Because you'll probably see in one of the screens that we have a visitor here from Germany, which is this book right here. This is Waffenruhe from Michael Schmidt. We were not talking about this book, but we will be talking about the other guy that we see here on the title, which is Einar Schleef. There you see him probably. This is by Michael Schmidt and Einar Schleef. And let me give you a quick introduction to him. And because maybe some of you know Michael Schmidt from his Waffenruhe book and from his other books that he did. But you probably don't know Einar Schleef. So this is actually a follow-up to the episode we did last year, where we talked about painters who photograph. We looked at Cy Twombly, Gerhard Richter, and other painters and how they approach photographing and what this standard profession they have, like painting, how this affects their photographs that they do. So this is actually, so I'm going to focus here always. There you go. So now today we're looking at writers who photograph. Actually, we're only looking at one writer. And we're only looking at Einar Schleef. And you probably know Michael Schmidt, but you do not know Einar Schleef. So let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about him and follow me a little bit into the rabbit hole that led me into finding out who Einar Schleef is. Because when I started out with this, I did not know who he was. I knew this one. I knew Waffenruhe, which is probably one of the most important books, certainly from Germany, probably from Europe in the 20th century. And I have always been thinking about this book. Yeah, this is Waffenruhe, so Ceasefire from Michael Schmidt, a book of photos. What I forgot was always that the name Einar Schleef was right there on the title. So it was always that this was a book from Michael Schmidt and Einar Schleef. So they shared the authorship in this. And strangely enough, as we are all photographers, we tend to make these kinds of mistakes to underestimate the text in this book. And you probably know the photos because Michael Schmidt has gained some reputation even outside of Germany, even outside of Europe. This is from an exhibition he did in 1988. On Ceasefire, there he was part of the new photography exhibition in the MoMA, where he showed a lot of the pictures from the book. Of course, what was omitted here at that time was the text that was in the middle of the book. And I always thought, why is that? If you look at this book, the text in the middle of this book looks like this. It looks awful. It's a mess of a desert of text. It's too wide, too big, too unwieldy to read. It comes right in the middle of the book, and it's like a wall inside the middle of the book. And here we find the rabbit again. So this is Das Kaninchen. The text is about a man sitting alone in his room with a rabbit. And the rabbit is all that is left from his family, who has his wife and his daughter who have left him. And he's sitting there alone and contemplating his life and contemplating life in this flat. And I forgot this text. I usually forgot this text much quicker than I forgot the pictures. So the pictures are very memorable. I only came back to this text when I hit upon this text by Alan Huck, who wrote especially about the text and about the importance of this text, how it disrupts the flow of the pictures inside this book, inside these pictures. And from here, this was one weird thing that I hit upon. And there I was already intrigued. So who is Einar Schleef, and why is this text so important, and why do I always forget him? So this was one part of this venture into the rabbit hole. The other part is this. I think it's important when we talk about photo books always to mention how wonderful, what's the function of photo book shops in the distribution of photo books. This is Bildband Berlin. This is arguably one of the most important photo book shop in Berlin. And this shop is in Immanuelkirchstraße in Berlin. And this is my favorite bookshop, photo bookshop in the world. So when I want to find out what's going on in the world of photo books, I usually go there. And so I did. That was a couple of months ago. And then I went right around the corner, and right around the corner on Winzstraße, this is just 5 minutes away from Bildband Berlin. There I hit upon Einar and Bert, which is a theater shop. They only have books on theater. And at that time, I had no clue what Einar and Bert means. All I knew was that both of these shops were in the eastern part of Berlin. This was the Soviet sector, and both shops were in the area that has been on the wrong side of the wall. I knew Bert, because Bert, as in Bertolt Brecht, this is probably someone you all know. I did not know Einar, but Einar, of course, stands for Einar Schleef. There I still did not know who Einar Schleef was. Bertolt Brecht was one of the most famous theater people, writers in Germany, and he even made it to the US with his, you probably all know his Three Penny Opera. This is a picture from 1955. This is Lottelenia that we see, the woman with the trumpet in the middle, and she's recording together with Louis Armstrong. She is recording Mac the Knife, which soon afterwards would become a huge hit even in the US. So the name Bertolt Brecht is a household name all over the world. So still, at least this is the question, who is Einar Schleef? Einar Schleef was born at the end of the First World War in Sangerhausen. Sangerhausen is a tiny city in the eastern part of Germany. This was the GDR, the German Democratic Republic. He studied set design. So he was a set designer at the Berlin Ensemble in Berlin, at that time East Berlin, of course. This was the old theater of Bertolt Brecht. And There is a famous word by Heiner Müller, who was also at the Berliner Ensemble long after the wall had come down. He said that was the only time after Brecht when the Berlin Ensemble was alive. And when things are alive in a communist regime, that usually does not end well, and did not end well with for Einar Schleef. So he was directing there, but he soon clashed with the regime in Berlin. He was expatriated in 1976. He was forced to leave the GDR. He was forced to leave his family behind, and he was forced to leave his girlfriend behind. He has never been happy in the GDR because it was a weird time. It was a communist regime. He then started working at theaters in West Germany. He had a hard time in Western Germany too, because he said a lot of things about Western Germany that people in Western Germany did not like. So he was in the GDR and said things that the Eastern regime did not like, and he said things in the Western theater that people did not like. He was a jack of all trades. He did pretty much everything. He was a director. He designed the sets for his pieces. He was a writer, as we will see. He was a painter. For us, most important, he was a photographer. He was a graphic designer, and later he even was an actor in his own place. What is also, I think, is important to know. This is what got him onto this in the title of this bookshop in Berlin. He was a tyrant and he was a theater fanatic. He did things on Aeschylus and Euripides, a piece called Mother with classical, which was derived from the antique plays by Aeschylus and Euripides in Frankfurt in 1985. He was known for his set design, for his bold costumes, for his bold plays that he brought onto stage, and the way that he involved people in it. He played Faust. He directed Faust here, right around the corner in Frankfurt in the 1990s. That was a piece that was very famous, that he got very famous for, because he had 8 Gretchen and 6 Faust and 1 Mephisto on stage. So he was known to be very resourceful in his interpretation, very free in how he interpreted it and how he applied the classical material of German theater and of antique theater to the modern times. He did in the end of the 90s. He did Sportstück, sport piece with Elfriede Jelinek. She would soon after become the Nobel Prize. He did it in Wien. I don't know if Anja had the chance to see him there at one time. But also there he was known for his bold scenarios and the bold pieces he put on stage. But he was unlucky, so he was not a happy man. He famously said that about the situation in Germany. There, the wall around us all, here, the wall inside everybody. So he was not happy in the GDR, but he was also not happy in the West he was not happy about the isolation that he saw people living in here. So today we will be looking at 2 of his jobs, the writer and the photographer, and look at what did he do and how did he photograph. Because the important thing about this rabbit hole, I forgot, because at Einar and Bert, that theater shop in Berlin, there I got a whole lot of books by Einar Schleef. One thing to see when you look at how painters approach photography in difference to how writers approach photography is this quote. This quote is by Elfriede Jelinek, who was very close in the end to Einar Schleef. she said about his photography, every picture is a beginning, a first photo in a row, before and thereafter, a very long story. So very much in contrast to how painters approach it, where for painters, the canvas, the flatness of the canvas and the picture itself is very important. For Einar Schleef, he thinks in stories, which of course makes a totally different approach to photography. In regards to Michael Schmidt, if you look at his books that he did with Einar Schleef, I think it's important to look at that he was a set designer. So he was always talking about, he was always thinking about how architecture is constructed to be looked at, not to be lived in, but to be looked at. And if you look at the books by Michael Schmidt, you will see what this means for a photographer. From this director, set designer, writer, painter, he was interested in what he called, one of his predecessors, Richard Wagner, said, Gesamtkunstwerk, an artwork that encompasses every piece of art. So it is a universal artwork. And he wanted to bring everything together. He wanted to bring sound together, language together, the speech together, graphics together. And he was trying to do it all by himself. And when you examine how he wrote and how he photographed, I think it is important to see the way he did it. He once said this: what became clear in my time of writing was that the different artistic disciplines that were all derived from the living conditions in the GDR now were assigned thematically. It became clear that every subject could only be treated in a specific discipline, that every subject had its very own form of expression, which I always find a very interesting thing to think about, that when you have different stories, that you are looking for the right way, the right medium to express this story in. And this is why he was trying almost everything. He also said that these disciplines cannot be mixed, which is weird for a person who does pretty much everything. These disciplines cannot be mixed. Each one requires a totally different life. To enter deeper into the chosen form of expression means suffering from the assigned occupational disease. So if you examine what he did during his life, his writing, his photographing, he did not do all at once, but he did it one at a time. So when he was writing, and then he stopped writing and went to the theater and only did theater. And then he stopped being at the theater and he only photographed. So he stopped with one thing and started another thing. So they were always mutually exclusive. But this life took a toll. So he said, with 40, I still saw Van Gogh as a mishap. With 50, I realized that the theater will destroy you. No increase in quality can be reached without pain. I had to punch my ticket and could no longer cheat the conductor. He died much too early at 57 on the 21st July 2001, pretty much broke and pretty much alone in a hospital in Berlin. With that, let me show you some of the work that he did in this short time span of his life. He was very close to his mother. So this is one of two books. The other book is pretty much the same size. He did a book where he wrote about his upbringing in the GDR, about his mother, about his life in the GDR. Beautiful book, and it was very close to him, and you feel this. So he was a writer. There's no doubt about it, that he was a writer, and he has this very hypnotic way of writing. But he was also a theater man. So this is where you see he has this graphic design upbringing. He did everything himself. He did the cover himself. This is Droge, Faust, Parsifal. This is a book that he wrote on his work on Goethe's Faust, which he directed, but also on Richard Wagner's Parsifal that he directed. And this is a terribly tough read. So I can't claim to understand more than, I don't know, 10 pages of it. But what I did understand is that theater is life for him. So there was no difference between theater and living. And this is a weird book because he's talking about Goethe and Wagner and Gesamtkunstwerk and all of that. But in between, he's mixing memories of the GDR, memories of his mother, his parents, the people that live across the street. And this is what makes this book so crazy, because you always feel, you can always feel him in this. Beautiful book, hard, tough to read. I have not yet found an English translation. So if you find an English translation, or if you want to take up the endeavor of translating this into English, I will be happy to help you with this, because it's really, it's an amazing book. He painted, of course he painted. So let me show you some of his paintings just to see how he understood it. Everything here, everything that he tied is tied to his work in the theater. So there is no difference between this. He wrote a lot about, he painted a lot about this, about his upbringing in the GDR and the weird way of not being at home in the GDR and not being at home in the West. And he mixed everything. So he mixed painting and writing. You probably can't read this. It's very tough to read, but he did this canvases where he wrote into this. So he was really a maniac with everything, pretty much everything that he did. So this is his painting. So let's look at the first photo book of his. This is something that I'm very happy to have, because I got this from an antiquarian place long after I fell down the rabbit hole, and I'm still trying to climb out of this rabbit hole. This is zu Hause at home, which includes pictures of the GDR where he was brought up. And it is interesting to see that this is a Surkamp book. So Surkamp is the one German publishing house that publishes all important German writers. They publish Bertolt Brecht, of course, they publish Hermann Hesse, Max Frisch, and of course Einar Schleef. They don't do photo books. They usually don't do photo books, and they did photo books for Einar Schleef. So this is a very rare occasion for Surkamp to do an actual photo book, and they did it in 1981. And it's good to remember this date, because this was way, way before Michael Schmidt did this kind of photography. And you find Einar Schleef's approach to this bleak approach to photographing nature, where nature is an expression of his inner feelings, of his inner space, the outer space being a picture of his inner space. This is very close, a very important precursor to Michael Schmidt's approach here. Of course, he photographed at home. He photographed a society that has vanished now. Almost nothing of this is still there. This is the old GDR, something that was unseen in the West. So there were rarely any pictures like this that came out of the GDR. So all of this was only published after he moved out of the GDR and went with all his negatives into the West. And it showed how it actually looked like on the streets in the GDR. And this is an interesting page. This is why I want to show you this page. This was way before Michael Schmidt's Waffenruhe. This is where it comes from. This approach text. This is where Michael Schmidt has his ideas. Here again, the text works like a block, like a wall that disrupts the flow of the pictures totally. It's just like you flip through this and you say, okay, and then you read this. And when you read this, it gives you the frame and the context for all the pictures in there. So it's an interesting approach to photography. And it is interesting to see what happens when a writer photographs, because he is able to combine both traits. And it just goes on. It just goes on with this kind of layout. And this ideas of home and being at home and longing for home, this was what governed all his life. As I said, all his work was derived from his expatriation from the GDR. So being expelled from the GDR, having to leave behind his family, most important, having to leave behind his mother, which he has not seen for 20 years. So he left in 76 and only came back somewhere in the 90s when she was already old, and he hadn't seen her in between. So, and all of this was derived from the GDR. It is interesting. So this is another book by him. This is actually the book that got me into this rabbit hole. This is an exhibition that was done shortly after his death. It contains all the contact sheets. And let me show you some of the pictures in here. For me, this has been a surprise, because we do not have so many pictures from the GRs, from the GDR from this time. So he has photographed on both sides of the wall, and he's really the connection between the GDR and the Western world. So he knows both of it, and he knows how it looks in both sides. And if you compare his pictures, which he brought from the GDR, and you look at Michael Schmidt's work, you immediately feel that they are connected and their work belongs together. And when you flip through this photograph, you finally realize, okay, what Michael Schmidt meant when he said, okay, Einar Schleef is a co-author of this. Let me show you some spectacular books, photos that almost reminded me of AG, from the early AG, but they were done in the GDR in the 70s. He also documented some of his few trips. So these are, this is a trip from he did to the USA. Here. These are pictures from different trips. And let me show you one picture of this, and let me compare this to, keep this in mind, keep this blocking of the view in mind, and then let's look at one picture from Michael Schmidt. You see the bleakness. Michael Schmidt, so Ceasefire, this is a book about the Berlin Wall and how it looked like on the other part of the town, so the western part of the town. The western part of the town was enclosed by a wall, and everything here is blocked. So he always has blocked views everywhere. Things that are hidden, things that are on the veil. It is even more stark here in the beginning. So one of the first pictures is like this. There's always something in front. And this gives you, when you flip through Michael Schmidt's books, this gives you the idea of being enclosed, of being claustrophobic. And they talked and they looked at each of those pictures. So Einar Schleef brought him these pictures. He brought him the pictures from the GDR, and he brought him these pictures with blocked views, because his view was also blocked, but it was blocked from the other side of the wall. Let me show you one thing, one sequence that I find extremely interesting. As I said, he was a director in Frankfurt. He worked there in '86, and after he had stopped, he became a photographer suddenly, and there he picked up color. And this is a weird sequence that was at the beginning of the rise of the new right in Germany, and he was one of the first ones who documented this. The Nazis that were suddenly back on the scene in Germany, and he was escaping these kinds of fascist regimes from the GDR, from these oppressive regimes from the GDR, and he was terrified about what happened. And this is a terrifying sequence that he did, and it reminded me not of Michael Schmidt, because Michael Schmidt rarely did color, but it looked almost like Paul Graham at that time, very similar to what he did. But you see the difference here, that he's always thinking in sequences. So he's always thinking in context, in history. Every picture here has to be read to be understood. And he's you see that he's a writer, and he is not afraid of making a great no-no of photography. He's including text in photographs, and this subverts the internationality of photography, because you have to be able to read what is on there. So this actually is an advertising for a jeweler. So a jeweler is selling chains, but this means there's always free yourself of your chains. So when he does that, if you know the German language, you can read the picture. If you don't know it, the picture is completely lost on you. And this is one of the major differences between writing and photography. Every writing has to be translated into other languages to be understood. And this is not the case with photography. And the sad thing about this is probably that this will be lost on non-German speaking people, because the text cannot be translated so easily. But this is what writers do. Writers read text, so they see signs everywhere and see that they need to be integrated. It ends for him in this book. It ends with the death of his mother. So this is first a sequence on a subway in Germany. This is where you see his scenic approach to photography, because he's using a whole sequence to talk about the subject, and he ends on this double spread. One thing that I find very moving is this the one time when he went with his mother into vacation. That was shortly before she died in '88, and he did this piece where he just photographed the sky, and he had these three pictures of his mother up there. And this is such a simple and moving thing to do, that you can only be a director to be able to do this kind of sequencing and this kind of setup. Let's keep this. We still have some time. As I said, he was not happy in the West, so he was very pessimistic about the capitalists. He was not only pessimistic about the communist regime, but he was also pessimistic about the capitalist regime, about the prevalence of advertisement everywhere. So he did this thing on advertisements, where he just followed this guy around through the whole town. Let's skip the. Here we see again the picture of himself. So he did some self-photograph, some self-portraits here.
So Stefan, there's a question from Jay, and he's saying, but aren't all these photo books, I think he's referring to when you were mentioning the issue with text, and if one doesn't speak the language, then the meaning is lost. And this comment or question is, but aren't all these photo books narratives with a certain culture, setting, and bias? Isn't this similar to the issue with text you mentioned? That is, you have to be in the know to get or understand a photo book.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let me back up a little in the rabbit hole. I did not get Einar Schleef. I got a little bit of Einar Schleef after I read that. You have to know a lot of stuff about Einar Schleef, about his upbringing, about the GDR, about the relationships between the two Germanys. And this is an interesting point to see if you are, as a photographer, if you do that or not, if you are willing to assume that your viewers are willing to deal with this kind of stuff. I think Einar Schleef, he did not care about that. So he just made his pictures and was not so conscious about how they are received. So he did not photograph for his pictures to be seen. That just came later. I think it is interesting to see with Michael Schmidt, who was much more a photographer. But even Waffenruhe, even Ceasefire, can only be understood if you know the whole history of the Berlin Wall, if you know that, if you know something about the time, if you can place this person here in a certain place in a certain time, then you understand the photo book and then you can read it. But I think this is something that we can learn from writers. There is something to say about the painters that we looked at yesterday. Cy Twombly's pictures are much more universal to understand. They are much more approachable because they have you do not need to know so much about it to be touched by it. Michael Schmidt and Einar Schleef, they belong to a breed of photographers where you have to know a lot of stuff. And this is a very good question, because this brings us to the last book. This is true for Ceasefire, but this is even much truer for the book that came after, which is Einheit, Unity. This is also a book by Michael Schmidt that he did after '89, so after the reunification of the two GDRs. And if you flip through these books, apart from even a simple picture like this, you cannot properly read it if you are not familiar, that this is the pattern that is usually on a German passport. So only now you can place this picture in its context. So, and this is true for pretty much all the pictures in this book. So these pictures are sometimes pictures that are taken from newspapers, where you have pictures of the important historical figures, but they are sometimes just pictures from people that that Michael Schmidt knew. And so every picture here has to be decoded to be understood. So there are different layers, different levels of understanding here. And this is, I think, for me, this is what we can learn from writers. So if you look at great writings of in the history of literature, Dostoevsky, you have to know something about the upcoming revolutions to see where his books, Demons, where this leads to. So you have to be able to decode everything. But still, on one level, it still speaks to you and it draws you in, but still you have to know, you have to read, you have to interpret, you have to place it into the long story that comes before and the long story that comes thereafter. Sorry, that was a long-winding question, but I think it was a long-winding answer to a very straightforward question, but I think you're totally right that you need to know a lot about the history of these pictures to be able to understand them.
There's also another question. Was Einar Schleef only writing fiction, or did he do other sorts of work?
No, this is actually, so this is not really fiction. So this is his life. Basically, it's the life of his mother. So it's a fictional recreation of his time in the GDR. And this is even weirder. This is an analysis of the many different versions of Parsifal that Wagner wrote. It is a detailed analysis of how the central perspective shaped the Western theater. So this is a very non-fictional book, but in between there are sprinkled stories about his upbringing that he, for example, there is a story about Kundry, which is a very important female figure in Parsifal, in Wagner's Parsifal. And he tells the story about the woman that he knew from the GDR that was the blueprint for Kundry. So, and this woman has absolutely nothing to do with Wagner. She wasn't even born when Wagner wrote Kundry. But he says, okay, this is my inspiration for bringing Kundry on stage. This is when I went into the stables and she was milking the cows. This is where I understood Kundry. This is where I understood Wagner. And this is a weird way to, a weird practical way to approach theater and literature. So this is a very non-fictional book. He also wrote his diaries. His diaries are really worth reading because you learn a lot about these strange lives where he was everywhere between the GDR and the West, not really here, not really there, living a life of two exiles. Yeah, and this is Einar Schleef for you. And I just wanted to end. Let me end on this note here. I forgot who said it, but a genius is the guy who stands on the shoulders of giants, is a dwarf that stands on the shoulders of giants and peeks over the wall. I felt with Michael Schmidt the same way. So Einar Schleef was not really able to bring his photography to this level that Michael Schmidt eventually did. But he preformed a lot of the things that Michael Schmidt dealt with in his pictures, and he preformed that. And he was very influential, not only in his photography, but and also in his writing on architecture, on theater, and you see this, you see his fingerprints all over this book. And when you look at his pictures, this is when you understand how he ended up as the co-author on a what has become one of the most famous photo books in Germany after the war. And let me end on this one here, because you can see it even, you can see his fingerprints even more on this book, which was Unity. I just want to mention it again because it has been reprinted recently, has been out of print for a couple of years. Shame on that, because it's the other one of his famous photo books, but it has now been reprinted. And if you get a hold of this one, it is totally worth it. And you probably, like I do, because I don't know so much about the history of my own country, you need a history book to decode everything that is in here. But it is well worth doing that and reading this photo book, which is different from looking at a photo book. And this is what I would love. If you take anything away from this talk, then you could maybe take away from this that even photo books need to be read and interpreted and talked about and decoded, just like every other work of literature.
Could you show us a few more pages from this book, Stefan?
Yeah, sure. It's a weird mixture of. This is also something that he got from. This is a weird sequence here. He has this kind of way of working against the good picture. So usually as photographers, we make a lot of portrait pictures and then we pick the best. And he just picks two. And Michael Schmidt does all these kinds of things, like photographing from a newspaper and blowing it up. And thereby making it into such an icon of anonymity. And there she is again. So a lot of Einheit of Unity is about identity, about coming to terms what we are as Germans now that we are unified. So what are we? Who are we? Now that we are people from two parts with very different life, with very different history. What does it mean to come together? What does it mean politically? Because there are a lot of political figures in here. Again, he does this text in images. This means Lebensfreude beseitigt. So he plugs this from a book, and it means the joy of life is gone. Here, a lot of this is introducing not direct photography, but photography of photos into the photo book. And he was one of the first Germans to do that. So the Japanese have been doing this for quite a while, but he was the first European to do it, I guess. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and you know somebody else who did it before him. Famous figures of German history. And both, as we all are, we are haunted by the war, and we are haunted by the Third Reich, which of course is, when you tell all the stories backwards, you end up always in the Third Reich, and you always end up at Hitler. And everybody knows it, and but this is a heavy book. This is a heavy book from to read, to understand, and bringing these two different histories together. This is from the Nuremberg processes where the Nazis were brought to justice. Those chancellors. Again, page like this. This is the German hymn. And of course, every hymn had a backside. And this is, again, one of the things that he's talking about in his book. The architectural truths of Germany after the reunification. This was not, when it came out, it was not a successful book. So it flopped, just like Ceasefire flopped, because nobody wanted to be confronted with these kinds of pictures right after the reunification, because we were all drunk on the joy of being reunified. And Michael Schmidt was one of the first ones who said, okay, maybe it's not all joy, it's not all gone with the reunification at all. Not everything is just fine afterwards.
Stefan, we have one other question,
Sure.
and that is, has someone done an academic sort of work to point out or list the specific non-universal references in unity?
I'm still looking for something like that. I think there is a Michael Schmidt archive in Berlin, and there is a curator of this, Thomas Wesky. So he's curating the aftermath, so all the inheritance of Michael Schmidt, and he probably knows all of this. And there came out, there was a huge retrospective about Michael Schmidt last year, somewhere during the pandemic. And together with this retrospective, there came out a huge book that talks about all the works from Michael Schmidt. And there are some articles in there that talk about how to decode unity and how to work with that, with this kind of photography. So there is something that you can find, but there is not, I think we're not at the point where we decode photo books in a way that we decode, for example, Ulysses. So at least I don't know about that.
All right. Wow, Stefan, this was amazing. The Einar Schleef double page with the 3 photos of his mother, and then we just saw the clouds in the sky. I thought that was very powerful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. This is really... I think you sometimes see that he's casual about photography. I don't know what would have happened if he was as serious about photography as he was about theater. Well, maybe let's end on this one, because this is when he approached when he was with his mother. She was close to her death, and he photographed her at home, and she was, of course, she was a woman of the GDR. She was working until she couldn't work anymore. And he just continued photographing until her death. But this is what Einar Schleef was. He did everything until there was nothing left anymore.
Thank you, Stefan. It was very inspiring.
Thank you.
I put all the books into the chat And in case you did not copy that from there, I can email it to you. Just reach out to me and I can send it to you. Well, thank you so much for being here. I want to wish all of you a good weekend. And I'll see you at the next photo book show or at a class in between, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you so much for your patience with me.
Lovely talk.
Thank you.